Jeff, Jeff, Jeff. Jeff, 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 Jeff. Jeff, Jeff. Jeff, Jeff. Jeff.
Jeff Stein's our national and presidential expert, noted author. Find his books at your favorite bookstore and totallyiowa.com. The Iowa Politics Report and the Iowa Business Report come to us from his flagship station, KXEL Cedar Falls, Waterloo, where Jeff Stein, of course, was the basis for Jake Gyllenhaal's ab workout from Roadhouse. Hey there, Jeff.
And I'm still waiting for a check for the residual.
It was like,
I'm the body double, and I'm waiting for my money.
Have you seen the Roadhouse movie? New one yet?
No, that's on one of those fancy streaming services, isn't it, that you rich kids have?
Oh, for God's sakes, Iowa, man, come on.
It's nothing to do with Iowa. I would say that whatever state I lived in, I'm just the curmudgeonly old man who believes radio should be AM and television should be free.
Well, there. Okay, I think the next thing that anyone from Generation Z will say is something to the regards of boomer. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I try to avoid saying things like, hey, I'm with you guys, you young hip kids, G. Okay, so.
Sup.
So, homies, home slice. Anyway, for shizzle. Okay, so speaking of for shizzle, let's go to SCOTUS first. So yesterday, it was a very interesting case, the Mifepristone case.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was, it's almost like, okay, I know the conservative Supreme Court justices have seen how the elections have gone since they overturned Roe v. Wade. They also know that the standard that they put forward in that ruling was states' rights, and that they're really hesitant to kind of start pasting, wide things. To watch Gorsuch go after this judge in North Texas and say, should we have judges in one court basically making laws for every state in the book? That never happened, and he brought the point that it never happened under FDR, 12 fairly important years in this country, yet it's happened 60 times in the last few years, and that this is something that needs to stop, which I think is a really interesting standard. But as well, the thing that they kept coming back to was it's not the case, it was the structure of the case, which meant who has the right to bring the case. These doctors have the right to not perform an abortion if they don't want to. And every time they were asked, so if that's true, then what's your problem? How have you been hurt here in this case? And to see Roberts and Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, it sure didn't seem like this case is going to get ruled on in a way that conservatives were hoping for, at least.
No, they were hoping that the steamrolling would continue, and it's not going to. You have some fundamental distinctions here, but the chief among them is the one you mentioned, and it's the legal principle of standing. Standing is the phrase that means you have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
And you cannot bring an action unless you specifically are an aggrieved party. Now, you can file what are called amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs, in support of someone, but the someone has to have legal standing. And the fact that they were going through such tortured conversation with the attorneys on the standing issue suggests that there could be a coalition of justices. Some who say absolutely the drug should be legal. Some who say we don't need to reach that conclusion because the people who brought the lawsuit did not have standing. So we concur in the result, but not for the reasons. And then you have the strong dissenters. And so that's going to give the conservative element of the court that says there's no standing. You might call that a legal technicality. I just call it the law. Yeah. But that's going to be their out, is to say, now, we never weighed in on the merits. You got to bring us a better case that's filed correctly. The trick on that to me is that's the kind of thing that gets caught by a district court. That's the kind of thing, Matt, that gets caught by a circuit court of appeals. In essence, the Supreme Court, those justices have to look and say, geez, the guys down the line, the guys in the gal sure missed this one. You know, it doesn't. It's a little tortured. Well, but that's probably how it's going to wind up.
And isn't that kind of what Gorsuch said? Is like, wait a second, wait do you guys? I mean, you have this. What we have is, and this goes on both sides. You have shopping for districts, and I think that this is what Gorsuch said. And obviously, I think Roberts goes along with him, and then you have the other three, more liberal judges on there. But what Gorsuch was saying is, I don't believe we should have one district judge basically making law for everyone in the country. And that's and his point is pretty valid. You can't have such consequences from these cases unless you have a lot of legal backing. And clearly they didn't have the legal backing. This just seemed like a judge making his personal opinion known. And it clearly seems to me to signal that the Supreme Court is not going to tolerate too much more of this, the shopping for different courts just to get a specific ruling.
Yeah, but every one of those people wearing a black robe, when they were a lawyer, they were experts at forum shopping. That's what they taught in law school. Those who were professors, those who were advocates. So it's disingenuous for them to say, now you shouldn't be shopping for the best jurisdiction, because they did it themselves. The thing that's interesting, now keep in mind, inconsistency, what? Yeah. But Roberts is the one who did not want to overrule Roe versus Wade. He's the one who was trying to lobby others for a specific ruling that would not have been an overvail. So when you see a closer case potentially, it's not a surprise to think that he does not want to go all this way. That he's in other words, if he's one of those who wants to kind of drive it more down the middle, that's not a surprise, because this is how he's been going all along on this issue. But for Gorsuch, frankly, to say, well, we can't have a situation where different states do things differently. Have you read your rulings?
Yeah.
In the last 3 years? And again, I'm not trying to be flip about it, but it's either a states' rights issue or it isn't. Now, the distinction with this has to do with FDA rules. FDA, the F stands for federal, and that's where you get into a different category. So I can slice this thinly as a lawyer to say the states' rights issue is the one in the Dobbs case, but this has to do with FDA, F is federal, and you could have a different standard. And I could say those are judicially consistent.
And regardless of where he was before, and when you're sitting on top of the heap, at that point, you can put forward your opinion. And let's face it, he himself, he did his research saying, we didn't used to do this. I don't like this. I don't want to do this. And regardless of whether he did it himself, he does want to stop it. The other element, going back to the other element of this, which I found fascinating. So the studies that this doctors group came forward with to make their case against Mifepristone have been recanted. They didn't do their peer reviews as they said they did. They lied about that. And then they all lied about their connections to anti-abortion groups. So those had been removed. I thought that was going to be a landmine, but they basically just sidestepped that, realized, good luck trying to bring those now in a new case. If you try to resubmit this, good luck trying to bring those. And just went back to we have laws that say that if you are personally religious consension, you are not consenting with this with your religion, that you do not have to perform this act. Henceforth, you're out of the picture. How are you hurt? By going back to that very base element of law, it annihilated this case.
Well, and the thing is, when you go to argue a case, you better have 2 or 3 different arguments. Yeah. In other words, you got your starter, but when the starter goes down, next player up, right? And so you have to, so the fact that they probably knew that they'd be hit with that, all right, let's go to this. If you don't like that argument, Justice, let's go to this one. And that's not to suggest disingenuousness. It's just to suggest that you better have different theories, because if you're pushing all your chips to the center of the table on one issue and one justice doesn't buy in, you've lost the whole thing. Again, this is really important because, and I know you've talked about this on the program, what's the percentage of abortions in America in the last reporting period that use this method? It's like 2/3. And so if you say that the Dobbs case is the law, which it is, unless at some point it's overturned, there's a practical, I don't want to say how to get around it, but if they say Dobbs is the law, but you can administer these drugs, again, where's the practical harm? And I'm saying that in a very practical way. I'm not talking about let's take people's rights away and that's okay. I'm just simply saying in terms of actual outcome, this case becomes very, very important, because if you allow the medication, if you allow the pharmaceutical, you've undercut Dobbs, haven't you?
But you see, when you look at the group that brought the lawsuit, their goal wasn't just to make this illegal in Texas. Right now in Florida, you have DeSantis, who just passed this bill against social media, so that social media can exist in the country. It's just if you're under the age of 14, you can't have a social media page. That's different. He's not trying to enforce that on all people across the country. And right. if they would have, you see, and this, I think this is why the Supreme Court called them out on this case. And by the way, your point about having 2 or 3 arguments ready to go, the FDA did. The FDA was ready for this case. The other guys were not. And it was, so they basically just called them out saying, if you're doing this in Texas, okay. If you're doing this just for your own good, well, you already have laws that protect you. Should you be able to dictate what happens in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Chicago from North Texas? And clearly they don't think that should be the case.
Well, it is a tricky, the states' rights issue broadly is a tricky one, because you don't just have 50 individual states. It is part of one republic. And it's always been the tricky balance for the court. But don't you think that those who brought this case or are bringing similar cases sort of got out over their skis on this?
Yeah.
In other words, and this has been, and I don't mean to belittle this, but I'm thinking of a coaching analogy. You've got to win with grace in class and act like you've been there. And it's sort of like the Dobbs case came down, and it's like, we don't know what to do with this. We don't know, we never expected this to happen. And so now they might have been better off just to say, this is a very nice victory, and let that play out. But it's the consistent push further and further that could lead to a turn of public opinion more broadly than what you've already cited with regard to past election results.
Well, and I think part of that is that kind of that hope that finally, okay, now we've got a Supreme Court that's just going to rubber stamp all these conservative issues. And clearly it's not no nuance. I mean, when Gorsuch went out on Native American rights, and he's basically saying, no, treaties supersede the Constitution, that's just the law, that was a real stunner, especially in Oklahoma. They were not too happy with that. But, it's kind of when...
You could never count on Roberts, right? I mean, if you're a conservative, you can't count on Roberts. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just simply saying, to your point about folks saying, hey, we finally got 6, and we can really do this, that, and the other. Not with that 6.
No.
And frankly, it's not new because, Harry Blackmun was supposed to be quite a, how'd you like that local reference for you? Mm-hmm. Was thought at one point to be of one political temperament, turned out to be something. Earl Warren, for crying out loud. I mean, if you really want to go back, justices who are appointed with a certain political predisposition often wind up doing something totally different. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, as long as they weren't disingenuous about it.
Sandra Day O'Connor, yeah.
Well, and right. So to presume that John Roberts is the solid conservative vote, he is the peacemaker taking things down the middle to not have Roe v. Wade overturned, and other examples all the way down the line.
And Kavanaugh is showing that he is not nearly the conservative bank that they think he is. And Gorsuch is just kind of weird. I mean, he has some things that he seems to be very progressive on, and some things he's very, very conservative on. I will say one definitive, though, to watch Alito basically try to make the argument for the plaintiffs in the case. That was Alito and Thomas are clearly. They were prepared to argue. Come on, guys, let's go with them. It was really hard to watch.
Well, imagine how it is in the conference room.
Oh.
when they literally do try to lobby each other. Imagine how that plays out.
Oh, God, that would be sleazy. All right.
Bring pizza for lunch, kids.
Speaking of Roadhouse. All right, we'll take a break. Come on back. Let's talk financial issues with the GOP when we return. It's the Matt McNeil Show.
Be left to my own devices, they come with prices.
Broadcasting in the evenings on WCPT 820 Chicago's Progressive Talk, and in the afternoons on AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. It's the Matt McNeil Show. Jeff Stein, kind enough to join us for his usual Wednesday visit. So, Jeff, I want to talk with you about money, because politics comes down to money. I mean, it really, one of the things I remember from 2020 is in September and October, Trump was laying off staff at that point while Biden was buying more ad breaks. And it ended up basically being, a major player there in that case. So far, it's looking even worse for 2024. The last numbers report had basically the GOP with half the money that the Democrats do and Biden does. And let's be honest, most of the money in the Republican Party, whether it's the RNC or Trump's campaign accounts, seems to not be going to campaigning, but going to his lawyers and going to paying off E. Jean Carroll, which that money's gone. That's not going to come back. And, with these other issues, there is a real big problem that is starting to become unignorable in regards to money and the Republicans this election cycle.
They don't have it.
Yeah.
That's the issue. That's it right there. And I don't have a problem. It's been so well known that money from super PACs that are there to support Trump are going to legal fees. They've said that.
Yes.
And so if you're a donor, you know that. You're sending money because you want to. You bought stock in Truth Social because you want to. That's all fine in terms of you're not perpetrating a fraud on the donor. But who's going to give if they really want it to go toward the electoral process? And that's why I had a conversation with a county co-chair today down here on different issues and whatever, and made a very big point about saying we make it clear in our fundraisers that our money stays local. We may give a little to a congressional candidate, but we're taking care of our county races, our state house races. When the pitch is buy local, I mean, and this is something we've talked about before, that the firewall between Trump and the RNC and other donors is you've got a House committee, you've got a Senate campaign committee, you've got all of these state parties. And I think what you're going to find is that if there is the same amount of money coming in, it's going to be going through different channels because of how people want to make sure that their money actually goes for electing a majority.
But if you're for Trump, okay, you brought up the Truth Social stock. You brought Truth Social stock. That's not going to go help anyone. You're buying his Bible. You're buying his sneakers. You're making a donation directly to Trump in any capacity. That's not going to go help anyone but Trump, if it does go to help Trump, if not his court cases. You are, is the Republican Party, it's interesting what you said about the county guy, because is the Republican Party, do you think, are they out there saying, okay, give to, say Michelle Fischbach up in Minnesota 7. Give money directly to her. You want to elect her, give it to her. Don't give it to anyone else, because that's basically the only way you can ensure she gets the money. That sort of thing. I mean, is it gotten to that point that they're saying that out loud without really saying the context of what it is?
They're not saying it out loud, but they're pushing it quietly. Okay. So in other words, it's not going to be the negative of, if you want to make sure that Matt McNeil gets the campaign money, give to the McNeil for Emperor committee. They're going to say, give your money to the state party, or, they're not going to mention the downside. They're not going to say, don't give it to the RNC, because who knows what's going to happen, because that's a train wreck. And we're learning more and more every day about what a train wreck she left, Ms. McDaniel.
And it's not getting any better. They're saying we can wreck it again.
you're starting in a horrible position,
yes,
which is why she and the staff was replaced. No, they're not going to say it publicly, don't give to that, but they're going to double down on the positive of help this county. You want your county board of supervisors to lower property taxes, give to, this kind of thing. So, yeah, there's a very quiet part to this that they're not saying out loud, but the elbow in the ribs is clear.
You've got to hope that Trump doesn't ask for like a tribute from the state parties. And, you know, as much as we that sounds like a joke. The reality is if he starts getting into a money crunch, especially when it comes to actually buying the ads and getting out there and running a campaign and paying for staff, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, considering how much he stiffed people for his live shows, and he does it with aplomb, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point this election cycle he sort of says, I need $1 million from every state party, or a similar amount, whatever the case may be in the percentage. But I need this money because this, the whole point is, as Laura Trump said, the entire point of the Republican docket right now is to get Trump elected.
Well, and it's not as uncommon for a national party to make such a proclamation as you may think. This one is tinged with a whole lot of other caveats and concerns, et cetera. I'd sooner think that he'd do the road show, and I don't know anything about stiffing people for fees or anything, but he would go to do your state party's fundraiser, and in the past he would just go and do it to raise money for the local party and to gin up votes. Now it might be there's an appearance fee, there's revenue sharing, there's something, because you can't just dictatorially say, I need $1 million from the state of Minnesota, but it might be, if you want me to headline your fundraiser with people who like to give money, then I need a cut of it.
At what point in your mind does Trump and the RNC have to be somewhat close to where Biden and the DNC are in funds to make this a decent race? Where's in your mind, is it July 1st, August 1st, September 1st? Where do you feel as if they're not there, it's not going to come?
Well, I would tell you that if it's not there by September 1st, it's not going to come.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That doesn't mean that the outcome of the election is preordained by that, because you're right. You were going to have a record amount of spending again. One estimate had more than, 25% more spending this time than 2 years ago, 15% more ad spending than was the case 4 years ago. Usually 60 cents out of every dollar raised by a national candidate goes to advertising. The Biden number may be pushing 70%. Because they're going to not do as many big events. They'll do much more targeted things, either on the social, on radio, on TV. And that's the stuff that sticks with people.
Yeah, and he had success with that in 2020, and he's going back to the game plan, and he seems feisty. So
why would you not? Why would you not go
exactly
to the game plan that won?
It's just keep pointing. Listen to what he's saying. Listen to what he's saying. Vote for me. Listen to what he's saying. Vote for me. Of course, the Iowa Politics Report. I'll post this a little bit later on. Jeff, as always, thank you very much, my friend. Chicago, bye. Minneapolis, St. Paul. Hour 2 up next.